Som. Não, era para ficar fresquinho. Podes pôr a circular, se for. Queridíssimo, desculpa. Thank you so much, everybody, for being around and coming to Brotéria today. It is my greatest honor to present my thesis director. Luc Foisneau. I did my thesis with him, and we worked on Thomas Hobbes. We're not going to be talking about Thomas Hobbes in that particular sense, but we invited Luc because he has a very, very interesting paper published by Cambridge on this book called Interpreting Hobbes' Political Philosophy. It's edited by Lloyd, who's a wonderful US scholar from, I remember, not South Carolina, California. South California University. And this paper draws on the possibility that mistakes, errors, might be immensely interesting. And so we have this series of lectures here at Brotéria called Eutopos. So Eutopos is a Greek word for good places. We all know about utopias and we all know about dystopias. We're not interested in no places, neither in bad places, but particularly in good places, whatever they might be. So sometimes we draw on interesting people that bring us larger overview of life. Sometimes we draw on ideas, as I suppose we're going to do today. Sometimes we draw on projects that enlarge the way we relate to the reality, and in a way what we're trying to do is to broaden our sense of reality, not being completely overthrown and drawn by this kind of media narrative storytelling. Everything is terribly bad, the world is going down, the climate is terrible, and we still think that even though all those things are true, there are good ideas, good people, good projects that are interesting, and that bringing them into the light helps us to have a more sustainable, a more truthful overview, if you want. So this particular paper draw our attention because the lecture today, it's called Learning Through Mistakes, the Productivity of Misreading. And so it's about looking at something that we all do, mistakes, and trying to see them as an opportunity, not just as a problem to be avoided, but perhaps as a possibility of discovering new things. We've had some other lectures here at the Eutopos series on disquiet and other more existential and more personal or psychological points. In this one, we'll be taking it in dialogue with political philosophy. Why so? Because Luc Foisneau, who I'm very honored to have here, and I'll just present him briefly, is a research director at the French National Center for Scientific Research, the famous CNRS pour les francophones. Presently, he's associated with the Center Raymond Aron at the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences. It's always hard to translate from French to English when we're so used to in Paris. So in between 2003 and 2006, he was a visiting research associate at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. And in 2001, he was awarded by the Institute of Études Politiques, Sciences Po, in Paris for his Hobbes et la toute puissance de Dieu, which is his first book. The one who is circling is another one who I'll be talking to. He has co-edited, among other volumes, and in my office I can prove you, because I have a lot of his books, Leviathan After 350 Years by Oxford University Press, and his research develops in the field of history of political thought in the 17th century and the 20th century, with a particular interest in the theories of sovereignty and their critiques. So it's a great pleasure to have you over. Thank you so much for taking the time coming to Lisbon. I wanted just to give a last thank to Fundação Santander. As you know, Santander Foundation supports these lectures. Without them, we wouldn't be able to host you and to invite you over. So it's very important to be grateful and not just for the money, but also for the willing for Santander Foundation to do this research with us. It's not easy. It's much easier to give money to much more trendy ideas, and we want to do the opposite. We want to go not just for the trendy things that everybody's also already talking about, but for all those great ideas, people and projects that no one is talking about. So it's a great gesture of, I think, generosity of their part, and I want to help them. And at the end, we'll be having a second thank you to a winemaker who offers us a glass of wine in the end so that we can keep talking Casa Sanchuima. So coming back to our mistake today. No, not a mistake, it's right, right decision. Going back to Luc Foisneau, it was a great pleasure to have you over, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Manuel. It's really a pleasure to be here with you because we have been working for, let's say, 4 years or more than 4 years. You know, PhDs, you know when the PhDs start. You never know exactly when they finish. But in the case of Manuel, it was very well done. And we knew that they were only 4 years. And I'm also happy to be here today because of the opportunity to meet with another, not my former students, but a former student of a great friend of mine who passed last year. Bernard Manin was a great professor in political philosophy, well known in France, well known also in the United States. And so that's a pleasure to name him today. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do this lecture in Portuguese. That would have been far better for all of you. So if what I say is not clear enough, don't hesitate just to raise your hand and ask me for clarification. And if it goes a bit too far, just tell me to slow down. So as Manuel said in introducing the topic, what I'll be trying to do today is two things. The first thing is just to try and introduce you to one dimension of the moral contemporary philosophy, which is named and known as the contractarian philosophy, contractualism, that is to say, a way to deal with the foundation of morality that is not based on the idea of the good, that is not based on the idea of, just like in Kant, on the idea of moral reason, but which is based, surprisingly enough in a way, on the idea of a contract, a convention, a cooperation between people. So the idea that I would like to introduce you to is this way or possibility of justifying our moral lives on the basis of a contract or a convention. So I'll try to, if I succeed in giving sense to this notion, that will already be something. But as the major theme of this cycle of conference is mistakes, happy mistakes, how mistakes that we can do in our lives, that we can do as a painter, as a musician, that we can do maybe also in politics sometime, trying to implement a utopia that doesn't go in the direction we would have liked, but which makes other things happen. As the theme is those happy mistakes, I try to show you how in this philosophy, moral philosophy based on contract, there has been an error or a mistake in understanding one of the most important moral and political work in the 20th century, that is the theory of justice of John Rawls. I don't know if you're aware of this work, but it plays an important part in this contractual philosophy I'm going to talk about. This book, A Theory of Justice, was published in the United States in 1971, and it has been a source. I say it for those of you who are not aware of this current in moral philosophy, it has been really a source of inspiration for many, many political and moral philosophers. And the basic idea of A Theory of Justice by John Rawls was to say that it's possible to talk about social justice, to make a judgment about a society saying it is just or unjust, or about institutions saying it is just or unjust, in a way that is not just or is not just ideological. That this is the reason why the book is called A Theory of Justice. You could have, if you are a mathematician, a theory of numbers. So when you say a theory of justice, you have this claim, pretension, that something rigorous can be said on the topic. And what has happened is that the philosophy, the moral philosophy I'm going to talk about, which is associated to the name of a Canadian philosopher who is called David Gauthier, that the basis of the philosophy of David Gauthier and his main book is interesting. It's called Morals by Agreement, which is very strange in a way for people who would say that morality is about making the difference between good and bad. Saying that morals or morality is about agreement is something really strange. So I quite like the title of the book, Morals by Agreement. And so coming back, and so at the basis of this book, to make a summary of my, or present in short my thesis, what I'm going to say is at the basis of the idea in this book that morality can be based on agreement, there is a mistake, a happy mistake in this sense, a mistake in understanding what morality was about in the book by John Rawls called A Theory of Justice. So this presentation I'm going to make is about the way moral philosophers are in a way advancing their ideas. This is something quite common. We all know that in the moral philosophy since Aristotle, the basic element, the way philosophers do work is based on reading each other. Well, you want to know a bit more about moral philosophy, you take Aristotle's Ethics and you start reading it, and then you write about it. St. Thomas did so he was commenting on Aristotle, and commenting on Aristotle, he was not just repeating Aristotle, but he was, in a way, inventing a new way to write about moral philosophy. So what I'm going to do now, what I would like to try and do and discuss with you after that, is try to see how in the 20th century there has been a reading of the book of John Rawls, A Theory of Justice, that produced a new way of thinking about moral philosophy. That's basically what I would like to do. And another element which is important is that in this reading that David Gauthier does of John Rawls, he uses a 17th century English philosopher whose name is maybe familiar to you, whose name is Thomas Hobbes. And my neighbor today, Manuel, has done his PhD on Thomas Hobbes. And so the interest also of talking about this foundation of morality, contractualist foundation of morality based on a misunderstanding of John Rawls, is that this misunderstanding, in a way, is due to the fact that David Gauthier was a great reader of Hobbes. So he has been interpreting a theory of justice on the basis of some elements that were not in John Rawls, but that can be found in Thomas Hobbes. So this is all what I'm saying here. There are three names important: John Rawls, the author of A Theory of Justice; David Gauthier, who commented on Rawls and made this happy mistake; and Thomas Hobbes of Malmesbury, an English philosopher who was born in 1588, who died in 1679, and who introduced into moral philosophy new ideas. So the first thing I'm going to do three things now. First thing, I would like just to say as easily as possible what Hobbes has been doing in the field of moral philosophy. How has this English philosopher of the 17th century transformed our way of thinking about what moral philosophy is and about what morality is? I think it's important to start with this, to make it as simple as possible, and then in a second time we'll go to the 20th century and see how the ideas of Hobbes were used to interpret the theory of justice in a way that is not correct, but which is very productive of new ideas. So, first part, first remarks, what is new in Hobbes's moral philosophy? What is new, and why do we consider him as one of the founders of the modern moral philosophy? And this is not necessarily easy to see. So I'm just putting forward one thesis. Before Hobbes, what's central in moral philosophy is the idea of the good. To have an idea of the good, and those ideas of the good can be very diverse. There are whole kinds of varieties. The good, it means, when you say the good, it's the good life. It's the good life, the happy life, a meaningful life. This is what you have in Aristotle. And so the central idea of moral philosophy, it's the good life, and the opposite, the bad life. What Hobbes does in his moral philosophy, and remember, we are at the beginning of the 17th century, we're in a period of civil wars. Remember also that the unity of Christianity has been strongly threatened by the French religious wars at the end of 16th century, where you have two kinds of Christians who are fighting each other. And so if they're fighting each other, it's probably because they have no longer the same conception of the good life. If they had the same conception of the good life, they would not be fighting one against the other, fighting, killing people. We know that those wars were very, very... there is a French historian who has been describing that in a very vivid manner, Denis Crouzet. I don't know if it has been translated into Portuguese, but he's really describing the ferocity of those wars. So, if those people, both Christians, do fight so strongly, it is for one reason mainly, because they no longer agree on what is a good life. If they had agreed, they would not be fighting. So the central notion here is disagreement about what the good life is. A strong disagreement appears in Christianity at the end of 16th century about what a good life is. So if people disagree, they can If you are in a tolerant society, they're not going to fight. They will accept that there are other ideas. But those people were not tolerant people, so they were fighting and killing each other. And so this is where the new idea about morality comes into the picture. Because one thing, if you've never read Hobbes, one thing you know about Hobbes is that he has said that the relationship between man, which means man and woman, humanity, in what he calls the state of nature, before there is a sovereign state on the top of us, is bound to become a state of war. One thing we know about Hobbes, the state of nature is a state of war. But why is this idea, what is this idea of a state of nature being a state of war to do with moral philosophy? The link is the following. You can interpret the state of nature, which is an idea of a philosopher. Don't think that Hobbes wanted to go in the street and say and observe. He was not a sociologist. He was not describing what is going on in the street. It's an idea, it's a concept. The idea is the idea is that people have different ideas of what the good life is, and that this difference in ideas produces conflict and war. And this is his starting point. He's not starting from a peaceful idea of humanity. He's starting from this conflictual representation of our common humanity, which is, I insist on that. This is a philosophical idea. So he pushes things probably a bit too far because he wants to make it an idea. And then what he says if the basis of our relationship is this kind of enmity, hostility, which can take the form also of lack of confidence. It's not necessarily fighting, it's a state of war. You cannot be fighting, but still distrust your neighbors. The lack of confidence in your neighbors is already putting you in a state of war. If this is our situation, says he, we've got to think the foundation of morality on a different basis. We can no longer think of morality on the basis of the good because we don't agree. We don't agree, so there's not one idea of the good. So what are we going to do? What Hobbes does is say, we've got to change the foundation of morality. And the foundation of morality now, in those years, let's think that you're in 1640, his first book, The Elements of Law, was published in 1640. His big book called The Leviathan, the big monster Leviathan, was published in English in 1651. His big idea, as long as moral philosophy is concerned, is to say the principles of morality, the rules of moral life are not based on the idea of the good. They're based on rules that will allow agreement between us. So what is a moral rule? It's a rule that permits us to make peace the one with the others. So what is a moral life now? What is a moral rule? It's a rule that permits cooperation between us. So the new notion central to morality is what are the rules, the principles, call them as you want, that will allow cooperation between us. This is morality. Morality has changed on its basis. It's no longer what is the good, that I can have a good life, but what are the rules that will allow for cooperation between us. So, just to make it very simple, if you're in your office working with your colleagues and so on, the moral question is not let's share a common idea of the good together and we'll become the best friends and so on. Doesn't work. The moral question, if you have disagreement, conflicts with people in a group, is what are the rules that must direct my conduct so that we can maintain cooperation between us. It's very modest in a way. We'll say, well, for morality, it's a bit, it's a bit limited. People would prefer that to know how to make a good life, the best life as possible. What Hobbes does is far more modest. It says moral life is about being able to develop a relation of cooperation, which would mean also some kind of trust between the people around me. And this means that for such a cooperation to be possible, that we must agree on a certain number of rules, and that we must agree also on the nature of morality. But the first point, and I stay on that a bit because it's very important just to really understand this idea before going further. But it's very important that you understand that the basis of morality has changed radically, and that now the main thing in morality is to be able to build agreement between us and to make cooperation possible, knowing that we have different interests, our interests are opposed, we have different passions, and we have different conceptions of the good. So there is a sort of reversal in a way. If you take Aristotle says what's important first is to share, to be able to have a common idea of the good, and then on this basis we'll try to develop a conception of the just society. So Aristotle starts with the idea of the good. From the idea of the good, he goes to the idea of the just society. What Hobbes does is exactly the opposite in a way. I'm just pushing it a bit, but to make it understand. What Hobbes does is exactly the opposite of Aristotle in a way. He starts from the idea that we don't agree on any idea and that we don't agree on what is good and bad. And from this situation of non-agreement, he tries to deduce rules of morality. So, to make it simple, what are those rules? Next question. You say, well, it's good. You understand the method is anti-Aristotelian in this way, but it doesn't help necessarily. What helps is to see that he's starting from disagreement, and he says morality is the rules that allow agreement or consent. I'm just talking about that the notion of consent in our moral and political discussion is very important, even in the relation between men and women and so on. The origin of this, the importance of the notion of consent goes back to the origin of modernity and of what Hobbes does in moral philosophy. So this is also important for very contemporary debates to see and understand what Hobbes has been doing. So what are the rules that will allow this new morality? Those rules, there are 19 rules. I'm not going to go into that. It's too late, it's getting a bit hot. And so I just want to make it short and give you ideas so that you can say, well, it might be interesting that I read a bit of this English philosopher of the 17th century. Maybe he's got some good ideas, so let's see and dig into it. So the first rule, we're in the state of nature, you remember that, it's a state of war. The first rule is that at a certain moment you say, well, I can no longer leave that house. It's not possible, there's no trust between me and my neighbors, and there's no trust. There is a high risk that I may be hurt by other people, that they do harm to me. Even I could even be killed, and this is very central to Hobbes, the centrality of the preservation of myself. They maybe not a general idea of the good, but there's something which is central. I must stay alive. If I want to have a good life, first of all, I must stay alive. If I want to stay alive in the state of nature, I've got to raise, a white flag and say, well, guys, let's try to turn our views differently. I've got to make an effort towards peace. This is the idea that to say, I'm not going to make it in this perpetual war. I've got to take another orientation and try to make. But how is it that you make peace in the state of nature? You make peace because the reason we are fighting is that we have rights. We have the right to protect ourselves. Okay, everybody got it. But if we want to get out of the state of nature, we've got to abandon our complete right, natural right, what it says. So we abandon it, but I abandon it if you abandon it too. If I renounce my right to defend myself and you keep it, and you keep your own right to defend yourself, it's not going to work out. I'm going to be killed. And it's not the point. So we've got to renounce it. And this is the basis of what is called this first initial contract. The contract is that we all abandon a part of our liberty, which he calls also natural rights, but this is technical term. We abandon this part of our liberty. I abandon it if you abandon it too. And we do it simultaneously. There's no state, there's no sovereign, whatever at the moment. We just renounce it. And there is a third step, because I say you, okay, I promise I renounce and if you renounce your right, I renounce, and we all renounce. So there's a level of trust that goes up, and of peace in a way, but there is a condition. And this condition, I stress it because it will allow me to go to the second part of my talk. This second condition is very important. And it's not difficult. It's quite easy to understand, but the situation is the following. If you make a contract, it's a kind of contract, but it's renunciation of your right to do everything you want, just to renunciation to total liberty. Okay, I say it to you that I renounce my right if you renounce your right. Okay, it's fine. But there is another condition. What happens if I'm sincere, genuine, I do what I say, and you say you do something, but you don't do it? You see the situation? Well, the contract is not going to work out because I'm engaged in the way of cooperation. You say you are, but you don't do what you say. You see this situation? And this comes to the third rule, very important rule in Hobbes, which is the rule about justice. Justice means not equal repartition of goods between us. It's not that. It's not distributive justice. It just means something very simple for Hobbes. It means that when you promise something to somebody, you do what you have said you would do. I mean, it's very simple in a way. It can seem a bit, obvious. You would say, well, of course, if I say I do something, I do it. You see the situation, but don't forget that we were in the state of war, where nobody really did other things than what is in his own interest. So what proves me that you're going to do what you do? So, and this is a rule of morality which is very important, because you can have all the conventions, contracts that you want in the world. If people do sign contracts and don't respect their contracts, it's not going to work. And so it's a very strong basis of this new morality that people will abide, as they say in English, or do what they have promised to do. And this distinction, I insist on it because it's going to be central to what Gauthier says in his contractualist moral philosophy, this difference is very important, and that some contracts are not obeyed, and that the people sometimes don't do what they promise to do. And so the basis of, and just to sum it up, to what have we gone to so far? First idea, Hobbes no longer believe in the foundation of morality on an idea of the good, because we're not sharing this idea. He thinks that morality must be based on the fact that we disagree on what the good is. And if we disagree on what the good is, then we've got to find new rules for morality, and those rules are based on the fact that we are capable of renouncing a part of our liberty if others do so, and that we are also capable of respecting the contracts that we have passed, the moral contracts we have passed with others. And this is also very strange in a way. To say, well, what is he talking about? Do you want to say that morality is based on contracts? You see, what I'm trying to make is just to have you understand that those people around Hobbes wanted to base moral life on some kind of convention, agreement between us and contracts. This is, and if he does it, if it's because he can no longer base morality on the idea of the good. And of course, it's better in a way to have a morality of the good. And some people have come back to that. Of course, you know it. Because you say, well, I mean, morality is about happiness. How can I make of my life a happy life? But this is not the question which is at the basis of Hobbes' moral philosophy. This is not the question which is at the basis of the philosophers around John Rawls, and just we're making a big leap in time because we're jumping from the mid 17th century, 1651, to 1971. And this is my second point. I just would like to give you a few elements to understand why people in the United States in the 1970s, so 50 years ago, decided to go back to this old idea of a morality based on agreement, on morals based on agreement. Why did John Rawls, who was a professor at Harvard University, he died not long ago, he died 20 years ago, so he's our contemporary. Why did he decide to go back to this idea? You know, this is very strange in a way. This is very strange, but I will give you one main element. He was, if he decided to go back to contractualism, this idea that morality is based on agreement, it's because he was opposed to the philosophers who considered that we could think of morality, private morality, but also collective morality, what is good for our society. He was opposing strongly this current in moral philosophy, which is called utilitarianism. I don't know if you're aware of those people, just like Jeremy Bentham, a very strange guy, very, very strange, because he decided to get himself, when he died. When he died, he said, well, I'd be very happy to not be buried, but be taxidermized. And it's the only philosopher, it's really English, they're really strange, you know, wow. They're really strange, those English people, but he decided to get himself, I mean, it's a bit of an excursus, taxidermized. And so if you go to this university in London, which is called University College London, it used to be, it's not now a university, it used to be a college of the University of London. And once a week, they take Bentham out of the cupboards, and you see the guy, seated, and he's taxidermized. So very strange, but a great philosopher whose idea, it can be very strange, but philosophers are strange, generally speaking. So original people, and so, but he was very, very peculiar. And so this Jeremy Bentham had this idea that morality should be based on an idea of the good. So in a way, he was coming back to Aristotle and Plato. We need an idea of the good, but where he was modern and really new was to say, but the good we're going to base our moral and social ideas on is based on what is pleasurable. What gives me pleasure must be the basis of morality. But it's a variant of the good, And he also had this idea that it could be also an idea to think of what the good society is. A good society is a society in which the sum of all the pleasant feelings that we can have get together. And if these feelings are of the good are increasing, well, we're going in the right direction, moral direction. If they go down, we're going in the bad direction. But I'm not going to talk about those people. I'm just reminding you of what utilitarianism was. And there is the idea is basically the same. Simply, it's got a new modern idea of what is good. Good personally for me is what is pleasurable, and good for the society is when we can increase the sum of common pleasure in the society. And Rawls came back to the idea of morals by agreements, morals based on contract, to fight against those utilitarians who said that morality should be based on the idea of the good conceived as what is pleasurable. So you see? So there is not a repetition. Philosophy does not repeat itself, really. But still, Hobbes was fighting against Aristotle, and he developed his idea of morality, morals by agreements against the conception of the good in Aristotle. And John Rawls, in 1971, in A Theory of Justice, developed his ideas as a refutation, a critic of the utilitarians who considered that morals was about goodness and the good conceived as the pleasurable. But my point here is not just to say too much about Rawls, but because my point is, and the point of the discussion is the basis of morality. Rawls was concerned about morality, but also concerned about social justice, and the idea that is going to interest us is how somebody like David Gauthier could make a mistake in reading Rawls that helped him introduce a completely new way of thinking about the basis of morality. Yeah, this is my point. This is what I would like to do. And he does it using ideas. David Gauthier does this reading of Rawls using ideas that he finds in Hobbes. So this is maybe a bit more complicated, but I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. And if it's too complicated, just tell me. I stop. So the point here is just in terms. So we're talking now of reading a book. So you've got A Theory of Justice here. You take this book and you start reading it. We're in 1971. Some of the ideas are new, but Rawls has been working on that since the 1950s. You don't produce a new theory immediately. And Rawls has been working on this, and he hesitated. It's the interest. Philosophy is not just, oh, I've got a good idea, I'm going to write it down. But sometimes you don't really know. You're trying things, and there is a problem. The problem of Rawls was in those years, 1970, 68, it was the time of the Vietnam War. There were fights also for the civil rights movements. So there were claims for more justice in the American society. We see that. I mean, it was 50 years ago. The situation now has changed, as you know. So, but we're in the 1960s, and there is all those claims about justice. But well, I mean, could be just an opinion. Well, for one person, justice is that. For another person, this is that. And so Rawls was just trying to say, to answer a philosophical problem, it's not ideology, it's philosophical problems. Is it possible to justify certain principles about justice in a way that would be possible, that would allow or could persuade people having different ideas about the good? That was his problem. He says, just like Hobbes, he says, well, those people in the American society are very much divided, just in all societies. Isn't there a possibility to prove, it's a theory, just to prove that it's possible to make an agreement about a few principles of justice? This is a theoretical question. Given that we don't agree on what the good life is, some are Catholics, others are atheists, others are Jewish, and so on. So we've got different conceptions of the good. On this basis, is it possible, does it mean something to say that an agreement on principles, not of the good, but of justice, is possible? This is his problem. And to prove that, he's not going to do sociology. He's not going to go in the street and ask people, well, would you agree on this principle of justice or not? It's not his way. By the way, John Rawls' daughter, Anne Rawls, has become a sociologist. I don't know if it was a reaction towards his father's philosophy, but it's quite funny to have that in mind about what the children do after the parents. But the point, the difficulty is that it's a theoretical problem, and I'm not going to enter into the details, but what I would like to do is just to say that he succeeded in a way to have this more than 600 pages long book, which was a huge success in the academia, in the university, and it became in a way, it framed in a way, just like theories. In physics, you have theories that are framing discussions about what matter and atoms and waves are. Well, he did make this theory, and it became sort of a basis of discussion between the people who were dealing with political philosophy and moral philosophy. They say, well, this is a solid basis, and at the heart of this theory, there is the idea that we have what he called the original position. We can, from an original position, we imagine a situation, an ideal situation, in which it's not the real people, but we imagine people around an imaginary table. Well, take a table here, we just sit around, but the people around this table will be characterized by a certain number of things. They are considered as moral, and this is a point which is important about what I'm going to say afterward. Around this table, those people are moral people. That means they have an idea of what a good life is, and they have a sense of justice. they care about justice, but also if we want to have those people agree on principles of justice, he said we have to have another conditions, which is that those people will be choosing the principles of justice under a veil of ignorance. And they will be ignoring things which make that we dissent between one another. Generally, let's take, in any commission, you take people around a table, they're going to disagree between themselves. Why? Because they know what their personal interests are. They know what their positions in society are. So around the table, if you've got very rich people and very poor people, everybody will be thinking, well, I would like to have a principle of justice which will be compatible with the fact that I'm rich or that I'm poor and so on. And they won't be able to agree. And so what Rawls invented was this theoretical condition. Of course, in the real life, it doesn't work like that, but we're doing philosophy now. And he says, let's imagine that the people around the table, they don't know a certain number of things. They don't know what their position in society is. It's yourself, you're around the table, you're being presented with a list of principles of justice, but you don't know where you are in the society. So it means that you must be able to think, putting your interest between parentheses, and you don't know also what your conception of the good life is. You don't know around the table if you're a Catholic, if you're a Protestant, if you're an atheist, and so on. This is his idea. And on this basis, you can reach an agreement. So the agreement is central to this theory of Rawls. But now I'm going to move forward, not to be too long. And so you say, so what's on the point about making a mistake? Let's go back to Eutopos. Eutopos' theme is happy mistake. So we're going to come to this point right now. The point is that the first readers of Rawls in 1971, well, there was a guy, a funny guy, and when he wrote about Rawls, he was on a boat, sailing on a boat. I met him at Oxford when I was at Oxford. He was very old. I was younger than I am. It was in the early 2000s. His name is Brian Barry. And Brian Barry was one of the first readers of Rawls. And the book about the theory of justice, he wrote it when he was sailing around the world. Funny guy, too. And so this Brian Barry says in his book, this is one of the quotes I have somewhere, but I'm not reading my paper because I think it's easier also to have a discussion freely and not read the paper, which is always a bit boring. But what he says when you read the theory of justice, you can have an hesitation because Rawls himself was hesitating. You can either say, well, this theory of justice, well, it's an idea of some kind of a contract between people who are trying to find an agreement, but negotiating between one another. And the result is the result of a negotiation. Well, there is one possibility, says Brian Barry, to read a theory of justice as if it were based on Hobbesian ideas. And in this reading, those people are not moral people. They are self-interested people. And they are trying to negotiate one with the other and to make an agreement on a certain number of rules to live together. You can read the theory of justice like that, or you can read it in a different way, which is the correct reading in the perspective of Rawls. You can read it saying that, well, those people are not, the people at the basis of the agreement, they're not self-interested only, they are moral people. they are people with a conception of the good and with a sense of justice. And it makes a very big difference. You can see it. I mean, take friends of yours. Well, you take your friends at home, you have a discussion, and among your friends, you see some of your friends are people with a strong moral convictions. They have a sense of justice. And when they think of problems, well, they will not think from their own perspective and self-interest, but they will just ask themselves, what is just in this situation? You know that. And among your friends, could be good friends, but they're quite selfish people, self-interested. And you know that when there is a problem, they will try to deal with the problem in their own perspective, and they will ask, what is my interest? Those are two very different perspectives in terms of finding an agreement. Yeah, you can find an agreement and say, well, we have got all kinds of interests. We're going to negotiate and make a compromise. This is one way. But everybody does it, the compromise, because of his own interest. And the idea of interest is central. The other way to deal with a problem of coordination is to say, well, everybody, we're moral people. And we are going to try to solve this problem thinking about what is the just solution, because I have a sense of justice. You know, a sense of justice is just as a capacity. Everybody has got various capacities. Some people have musical capacities, some others have reading capacities. And well, some people have a sense of justice, a capacity for justice. If you take a judge, for example, you say, well, being trained as a judge means that you must develop your capacity for justice. If the judge is just going in the direction of the people who pay him more, I mean, you don't call him a judge, or you don't call her a judge. So this difference is very central. Either you have a group of self-interested people trying to find a way to agree, or you have a group of people with moral people who have a sense of justice. And you give them, in the theory, this sense of justice. But the situations are very different. And so the problem was just to say, how are we going to read a theory of justice? Is it a theory meant or addressed to people who are just self-interested people? Or is it a theory that presupposes that people are capable of a sense of justice? You see, it's very different. And even in the way you look at other people, because, I mean, it's philosophy, theory, but you can see it in your way of relating to your people, to your friends. Sometimes you say, well, she's got a real sense of justice. Even if it's not in her interest, she's going to say this is just, and I abide by it. And I don't care whether it's in my interest or not. Or you have other friends who will just be self-interested. They will always choose the situation, the solution, which is in their interest. And so here, coming back to our book, it's hermeneutic, reading books. There was this hesitation between a reading of a theory of justice as a book meant for self-interested people, or as a book meant for people capable of or having a sense of justice, having a capacity for justice. And this is a very, you see, it's two readings of the same book. The truth, I give you the solution to go, because I mean, it's just, the solution to this is that the truth is, Rawls defended his views on justice on the basis that the theory is meant for people with a strong sense of justice. So he abandoned the idea of a theory of justice for self-interested people. So this is what we call, but I'm not going into the details, but this is the Kantian interpretation of Rawls. And Rawls defended this Kantian interpretation. He says it explicitly in his theory of justice. And what happens, our friend David Gauthier read the theory of justice not on the premises that, and on the basis that Rawls himself defended. He said, I'm going to read the theory of justice considering that it's meant, it's addressed to self-interested people. You see the point? So it's a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding because Rawls himself wanted his theory to be considered from the perspective of moral people, people having a moral sense. And Gauthier said, I'm going to read it differently. I'm going to try an experiment in philosophy, and I'm just going to try to prove a different thing. So what is Gauthier's problem? How does he changes the focus in a way of the moral theory? He says, well, I'm going to try to think things differently. I'm not going to start with people having a strong sense of justice. I'm going to start with the idea that people having no sense of justice, self-interested people, but I'm going to try to demonstrate that those people without a strong sense of justice, in interacting one with the others, will be obliged in a way to pass, to agree on a certain number of rules, and will be obliged to abide, that is to obey, to the rules on which they have agreed. And this is a completely different orientation in moral philosophy, because his idea is to say that we can produce, to say it very grossly simply, but it's important that you get the idea in Gauthier's book, Morals by Agreement. He wants to show that from a situation in which you have not immoral, but amoral, people who are not considered endued with a sense of morality. You take people without a sense of morality, what he calls morally, axiologically neutral. Those people have they're self-interested. And those people in certain situations are going to interact, and they will be forced to make an agreement. And I will show you, that is David Gauthier, that the obligation in which they will be to abide by their agreement is a moral obligation. So what's interesting in this? He says, he claims, he says that it's possible in a way to produce morality, a moral sense of obligation in this sense. It's not a sense of justice, but it's just a sense of obligation. It's possible to produce a sense of obligation, of moral obligation. I have a moral obligation to do what I said I would do. You remember what I said at the beginning? I have a moral obligation to do what I said I would do, and he wants to produce it on the basis of a situation, initial situation, in which people don't have a sense of morality. It's from a theoretical, philosophical perspective, it's really interesting because it's really a philosophical problem. Can you produce morality out of nothing? Can you produce morality out of a situation in which you have non-moral individuals? You have just people who only care for themselves and their own interest. You see the problem? And this is a very high stake. But that was not the problem of Rawls. You got that? Because Rawls started from the beginning saying, well, there is a sense of justice. I'm not going to show you how we can produce a sense of justice. It's another question. It's not Rawls' question. The starting point is, say, we start with moral individuals. Whereas David Gauthier says, we start with people who are not moral, who have no sense of morality, who are self-interested, and I'm going to show that those people are capable of feeling an obligation to do what they said they would do and to respect the contracts they have passed. So this is a very complicated, I will stop before entering into the technicalities. But what I wanted to do, and I'm going to sum it up and maybe stop on that, I would just like to make a very quick summary, just to allow for the discussions between us, if you think it's the good timing. I would like to just to make a summary. The first idea, which we have been discussing or presenting, there is a great change that happens at the middle or beginning of the 17th century, when Hobbes says that morality is not a morality of the good, but a morality of the rules that we can deduce from a situation of conflicts between people who disagree on what the nature of the good is. So this is the first idea. We reverse the thing. We don't agree on the good, but we must produce rules to get an agreement on maybe cooperation, just cooperation between us. We just make a jump in time and find ourselves in the middle of the 20th century in the United States, where John Rawls says, I no longer agree with this idea that morality should be based on the good conceived by the utilitarians as a summing up of all the pleasurable feeling that we can have. I want to develop a view on morality based on a certain number of principles of justice. And this justification it produces is based on the idea of agreement. This ideal situation of people under the veil of ignorance who are going to agree on principles of justice. And third element, third idea that we had, David Gauthier, this Canadian philosopher, in the 1980s, will read the philosophy of Rawls and say, well, this is a good idea just to have a revival of contractualism, but let's start with people who are just self-interested people, and we'll see how those people will be obliged in a way to cooperate between themselves, and they will agree on certain rules of cooperation, and they will show that their obligation to abide by those rules is a moral obligation, and so we can produce a moral obligation out of a situation which is immoral. So this is basically those ideas that help introduce you in the field of what we call morals by agreement, a moral theory based on the idea of agreement, contract, convention between us, which means this is a very human kind of philosophy, because we know that morality is also has to do with very basically with a kind of relationship we have with our neighbors, people we haven't chosen, they're living next to us, and so on. And the way we're going to behave towards those people, the question is, on what basis? On what kind of rules? And the idea of contractualism is to say, well, the basis of morality is just the fact that we are there together, capable of a certain kind of reasoning, we're capable of reasoning, and capable of agreeing on the fact that a certain type of behavior is better than another. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, thank you so much. So before I open the mic for people to ask questions about and think out loud with us. I'd like to just stress the point that we had. This was a premiere at Eutopos series, because if I got you right, you gave us 2 Eutopos for the price of 1. The first one is that misreading. David Gauthier misreading actually gave us some very interesting tools, and so it was worth going through it. But if I got you right, the second Eutopos you pointed out is that even in difficult times where people do not agree on what is a good life or share a notion of good, even in times where we cannot trust each other, political philosophy has the tools for us to think how we can get back to being able to live with each other. And that's also a very interesting take on the subject, and I'd like to thank you for that, I think, contribution and kind of bringing it onto to us. So I'll take it. 2 Eutopos for the price of 1. Thank you so much. So if there's any questions, please. We have to be quite disciplined because there are people who are just seeing, so we're gonna ask for the microphone so that everybody, those who are here and those who are at home, may profit from your questions. Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for your lecture, which I found fascinating. My question is perhaps a bit technical. It's about the relationship between game theory and contractualism, because as you described it, these contracts more or less arise as, well, I wouldn't say a practical solution, but certainly, given the circumstances, something that helps smooth over interactions between people. And Rawls himself presents a view of society where the ideal arrangement is the maximum solution, which is a term from game theory. So I was wondering if a reading of contractualism as sort of contracts arising as solutions for repeated coordination problems between people would be a fair reading, or if you think there's a more substantial moral underpinning to the argument.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Take more questions, or you take one by one?
well, maybe I try to answer this one, and then we pass to another one. Of course, I mean, in my presentation, I just wanted to make a huge introduction, a large views on the topic. But you're right. I mean, there is a difficulty with game theory and also social choice theory, because one of the first attempt by Rawls was just to say that his theory of justice could be interpreted or understood in the perspective of the social choice theory. But then he changed his mind. So there is in Rawls himself a kind of shift from that. He was quite interested in economics and also not so much game theory, but social choice theory. But then, in a second reading of Rawls by himself, he decided that it was not the proper way to deal with the questions, and this is where he turned to what is called the Kantian interpretation of the theory of justice. But the truth is that there was this element, theoretical element, in his first attempts, because it's Justice as Fairness. The beginning of a theory of justice was published as a paper, as you know, in 1958. And so at this time, those theoretical elements were present. So the people who were reading Rawls really said to themselves, well, is situating himself in this perspective of social choice theory. And people like David Gauthier kept to this initial intuition, which Rawls himself dropped after that. And this is where I come to your point, because of course there are various ways of interpreting and understanding those problems of cooperation or coordination. I'm not going to go into the details, but the repetition of the coordination problems could be a way to deal, which is influenced by the way David Hume would think of coordination problem, because as you know, Hume himself, the Scottish philosopher of the 18th century, made a critic of the contractarian theory of the 17th century, saying, well, when we cooperate in the society, the good model is not meeting each other and, say, signing a contract. I'm making it simple. But the good model is when you are on a boat, you know, you're on a boat, rowing on a boat, the coordination, you don't need to sign a contract to make your boat advance. What you do is just coordinate, and you repeat the same gesture. You see, you've done that already. If you're on the boat with your friend does some that, and you do it afterwards, the boat turns around. So Hume said, and this was quite a brilliant idea, he said, well, to solve coordination problem, let's forget about what lawyers do. It's not a question of contract, it's a question of coordination. At the beginning, it doesn't work. And the more you coordinate, the faster and the straighter the boat advances. And so this is, of course, one solution, the Humean solution, to go along that line, and which means also, I don't want to be too long on that, but which means also that there are huge technical problems on that. Philosophically, the point is to say, what is best for coordination? And you can say also, and Gauthier was thinking about that, for Gauthier is an adept of, a defender of the free market, and he says, many problems are resolved by the market itself. You don't need to decide to speak with one another on the market. The coordination, it's a coordination without a coordinator.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, an idea that you're expressing an idea of contracts as naturally emerging from repeated interactions, as opposed to something that is fixed top down and imposed on people.
Not exactly, because in Gauthier you've got the market on one side, which is this coordination, free coordination, but he says all political problems cannot be resolved on that, and for a certain number of political problems, we've got to find other way to get a coordination. So he's not a defender of a free market, but he's trying to find other way to think of coordination. Otherwise, it would be too easy. It would be natural. The solution of the problem of coordination would always be natural. We know it's not the case.
Thank you so much. If you would be so kind as to pass the microphone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for such an insightful conference. I'm not a philosopher, but I have two small questions. First of all, as I can see it, the title of this conference, which says that Gauthier went on from a mistake, is probably an irony, right? Because was it and that's my question, was it a mistake, or was it, in fact, it's a synagogue, what he did, right? He made a certain interpretation of what Wolf had said. So my first question is, was it really a mistake, or was it what he really wanted to take out from that idea? And the second question is, or perhaps more a comment, is that from Gauthier's ideas, which defend that there is possible and also good that there are agreements within people that are not moral and that are selfish, I think that makes us understand a lot of what is happening nowadays in politics, not only, especially in the United States, but not only in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you for your two questions. And well, you're right. I mean, so was it a mistake? I just skipped a few elements of my paper because the initial point, the starting point of Gauthier was a reading of Rawls by another man, another colleague, a philosopher whose name is Wolff. The title of the book was called Understanding Rawls, and it was published very soon after the theory of justice. And in this book, Wolff wanted really to make a correct interpretation of the theory of justice, but the interpretation it did was indeed a misunderstanding. So there was really a mistake. So I took your invitation seriously, and the title of the conference, or the cycle of conferences seriously. There was really a mistake in interpretation. Maybe due to the fact that a theory of justice was developed from a certain type of idea and arrived at another point, which was Kantian. But there was really, so to answer your question, yes, there was a mistake in interpretation on the part of Mr. Wolff, and the book called Understanding Rawls would have better been called Misunderstanding Rawls. And Gauthier, when Gauthier did read the book by Wolff, so it's hermeneutics, people reading each other, well, he could see that. He could see, because Gauthier had understood that the correct interpretation was a Kantian interpretation, but he said, this misunderstanding of the theory of Gauthier of Rawls by Wolff is interesting. This is a happy mistake. This is an interesting mistake. There is a misunderstanding. It's not what Rawls said, but let's take this starting point and let's try to see what we can make out of it. And this is how his idea of morals by agreement came to his mind. But if he did, he was interested also by, and if he could find interest in a misunderstanding, it's also because David Gauthier, before he started constructing his theory of morality based on agreements, was an interpreter, just as Manuel is, an interpreter of Hobbes. And so, on the basis of his reading of Hobbes, reading the misunderstanding of Rawls, he say, well, let's start to develop a new theory about the basis of morality, which is what you very well summed up. That is, take self-interested people and try to see how we can produce some kind of moral obligation. Well, the point is, on the sociological, political dimension of this theory, it's always difficult to say, because philosophers are not sociologists. Philosophers do like to invent ideal situation, not utopian, but ideals. What philosophers do, what sociologists and anthropologists do like. They take a group, they describe, they're really curious about the details and try to understand how it really works. This is what sociology and ethnology does. But what philosophers do, they like to abstract from the real situation and just concentrate and focus on 2 or 3 elements. This is why Hobbes, who had been describing, seeing what a civil war is. A civil war is a mess, to be honest. A civil war is, you don't know really what's happening. You see, and philosophers want to abstract from that, and this is how Hobbes invented the state of nature. And the state of nature, it's a theoretical idea, just like Descartes in the meditation. You know, to understand what the I is, it just abstract. And so Hobbes abstracted, and he said, I'm going to keep a few elements. And Gauthier does the same, because we're not self-interested people. We're just affectionate people we love each other, we hate each other. We're not just, thinking about one's own interest all the time is so boring. You see what I mean? It doesn't describe our relationships. We're just passionate people with affections, and we're not just self-interested. But the idea of self-interestedness is interesting. So you say, let's imagine that we just have self-interested people. And let's see the situations in which the interest will function by itself, its market, ideal market situations. I go to the butcher, he doesn't like me, we don't care. I give money, he gives me butter or bread or whatever. You see, this is a market situation, but there are other situations of coordination in which, if you think people ideally are self-interested people, then you see those people at a certain moment agree on doing that. But the question of Gauthier is, we have agreed, but is it, if I agree with you to do something, am I really obliged to do what I've done? That was his problem. Because the sense of obligation is a moral sense. You see, if you're a moral person, you have promised your neighbor to be there tomorrow, whatever, it's not in your interest. You've got other things to do. If you're a moral person, you will do it. This is what morality is about. So Gauthier here is not describing what is going on in his society. It's not sociological. It's nothing to do in a way with the United States or the Canada or Portugal. It's really an ideal situation in which one of the bases of morality in modernity, which is to say that we're interested people, is put in a theoretical situation, and he says, from that, is it possible to, and the result, because I didn't say the result of his situation was that he was unable to prove that if we are just self-interested people, we'll ever be really obliged, morally obliged, to do what we have promised to do. And so he's got other ideas, and Gauthier is a reader of Hobbes. He says in the way, there's no possibility to become. If we start with not being moral people, you'll never arrive at a situation where you will really behave as a moral person. There will just be some kind of hypocrisy, and the truth is, the reason why you'll be doing what you say that you would do is the fear that you have of the sovereign. That is the fear of some external constraint on your behavior. So in a way, it's morals by agreement is interesting. The idea as I presented it is certainly an interesting theoretical idea, but the result is that it doesn't work out. And so you see, and so I've answered, I hope, your first question, maybe not your second question.
Thank you so much. So one of the things that gets along with very good ideas and good talks is a very good glass of wine. So I invite you all to keep discussing with Luc on a more informal setting. Just down the corridor, there's wine offered by Casa Santos Lima, we thank. Fundação Santander also, we thank for their support in these lectures. If you want to support Brotéria as well, as you know, these talks are free. If you want to support us, there's a donation point downstairs. It's not to pay for the wine, it's to help us out. And finally, and most important thing, we will thank Luc Foisneau for this very interesting talk and for enlightening us in so many Eutopos ways. Thank you so much.